Hello everyone, and we apologize for the late start. We had some technical issues. My name is Sue English, and I am the Outreach Services Director for the Jefferson City Rape and Abuse Crisis Service. I am so excited you can join us today for our very first ever live panelist series. And with me to kick off this series today is Angela Hirsch, our Executive Director of RACS. Angela, would you like to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I have been the Executive Director here at RACS since October of 2020. Prior to coming to RACS, I was the Chief Program Officer with Central Missouri Community Action. But what some people may not know is that I actually started my career here at RACS in the 1990s. It was one of my first jobs out of college, where I was hired as the volunteer coordinator, and then a couple of years later became the first prosecutor-based victim advocate in a partnership program that RACS developed between the Cole County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, the Jefferson City Police Department, and the Cole County Sheriff's Office. And I am thrilled that that partnership is still active to this day, and we still have that advocacy work happening. And we do still have an advocate based in the Prosecuting Attorney's Office here in Cole County. So when I had the opportunity to come back to RACS as an executive director, I jumped on it.
So would you say that was like coming home?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Absolutely.
very much so.
Perfect. So, 99 you started here, but you came back in October of 2020. Has anything changed?
A lot of things have changed. I actually started with RACS in 94 and left in 98. And in that time period between 1998 and 2020, a lot has changed. One of the biggest changes has been the shelter itself. When I originally worked for RACS in the 90s, we were in a location downtown in an old apartment building that had been converted into the shelter at the time, which was actually the first shelter that RACS established in the late 1980s. And in the late 90s, 1999, 2000, RACS had the opportunity to build a new 36-bed shelter facility in a non-disclosed location that was developed through partnerships, donations, and just the support of the community. And that's probably the biggest difference. And it was funny when I first started here, my first response was, oh, I get to work in the new building, even though the building was 20 years old. But to me, it's still the new building.
So tell me a little bit about what RACS does.
So we provide direct services to survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and other interpersonal violence crimes. Our services range everywhere from shelter services for individuals who need a safe place to stay because it's not safe for them to stay at home. We offer counseling services to adult and child survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. We also have outreach services. RACS serves a 9-county area here in central Missouri. So our outreach services are designed to make sure that our services get out to people who need them instead of people having to come to Jefferson City to get to us. We also have a children's program. We offer outreach and education throughout all of the 9 counties that RACS serves. That's everywhere from school presentations that Sue, that you're very familiar with, to providing educational opportunities and presentations and informational sessions to law enforcement, judicial professionals, civic groups, churches, people who want to know more about the areas of domestic violence, sexual assault. How can it be prevented? How can they help those who've experienced those situations? And how do we just basically try and create preventative forces within our community?
Now, does domestic violence and sexual assault just affect certain people, or is it?
No, not at all. You know, one of the things about domestic violence and sexual assault is that it knows no bounds. It happens across all socioeconomic classes, races, religions. It doesn't matter. probably the most common thing when it comes to domestic violence is that it's about power and control. And the abuser is utilizing threats or physical violence to maintain that power and control over his or her victim. We know that domestic violence can happen to men as well as to women. But we also know that women are 10 times more likely to be victims of domestic violence than men. So when we talk about domestic violence in generalities, we tend to use the female pronouns when describing a victim and a male pronoun in describing a perpetrator, just because the statistics show us that fact.
So I want to take a little pause and see if anybody on Facebook Live has any questions. Victoria, do we have any questions so far? No? Okay, we'll go right back into it.
Okay.
So, 9 counties, that is a big service area.
It is. Our service area is 5,000 square miles. So it's a large area to cover. We are fortunate, though, in that in several of our counties, we have sister agencies that we work very closely with, because it's not about who can serve the most victims. It's about making sure that victims of these crimes have access to the services that they need. So we partner with organizations like CARD-V in Fulton or CADV in Camdenton, True North in Columbia, to make sure that survivors of these crimes have access to the services that they need. If RACS is the organization that is available and best able to provide those services, great. If it's one of those other organizations, absolutely, we will make sure that we work with them in tandem.
So as a nonprofit, do you just run the whole building, or is there someone who oversees?
Well, as a nonprofit, we all wear many, many hats. We have an amazing team here at RACS. We have an amazing director of shelter services. Her name is Gwen Jennings. And Gwen kind of oversees the functions of the shelter itself and the building itself, making sure that we have the facility is clean and safe for those that are staying here, that we have those items that we need, things like bedding, towels, personal hygiene products, all of those different types of things. Gwen also is responsible for overseeing the internal services that happen here at the shelter. So when a family comes in for shelter, Gwen and her staff work very closely with that family to try to make them as comfortable as possible while they're here. It takes a lot for an individual to make the decision to leave a violent relationship, let alone go into shelter. So Gwen and her team work really hard, like I said, to make sure that those families that do come to us are comfortable, that they have their basic needs met. We have a great relationship with the Food Bank of Central and Northwest Missouri to make sure that we have food, that families are able to provide for themselves while they're here. A member of her staff works as a case manager with all of our residents. We call them guests that are staying with us to help them develop a plan of where do they go from here. And it truly is the plan of the resident. It is not a plan that we develop for them. So it's a matter of allowing people who need a safe place to come in and take a break, take a breath, figure out what's my next step, where do I go from here. For some, it just takes a couple of days. For others, it takes a longer period of time. We're not here to rush them through that process, but to make sure that they have the supports and the resources that they need to take those next steps.
That's good. So that was Gwen Jennings, the Director of Shelter Services. So we're going to take a quick pause again. Do we have any questions? No? That's all right. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot them to us, and we'll make sure Angela answers them.
Or do my best.
So, I guess my next question would be, as a nonprofit, you don't charge for it.
Correct.
So where does that money come from?
So you're absolutely right. All of the services that we provide, everything from shelter to counseling, case management, the whole bit, are provided to those who come to us completely free of charge. That doesn't mean they don't cost anything to be able to do. So we rely very heavily on state and federal grants that support the work that we do. Our largest grant that we receive is the Victims of Crime Act money that comes down from the federal Department of Justice through the Department of Social Services. That grant gives us the funding to support our shelter services as well as our counseling services. We also have funding through the Stop Violence Against Women Act. That funding provides support for our victim advocacy and some of our outreach. So our victim advocate that I mentioned earlier, who's at the prosecutor's office, is funded through that Violence Against Women grant. We also have just recently obtained funding through the State Services to Victims Fund through the Department of Public Safety. That is local state monies that is available for crime victims in a wide array of realms, whether it be through shelters like ours, law enforcement agencies, etc. And that money we were able to utilize to boost our outreach efforts and to really increase our presence in the outlining 8 counties outside of Cole. And then we are taking our first steps towards prevention activities. Excuse me, our agency was awarded a grant through the Department of Health and Human Services just the 1st of 2021. And that grant, we are working with various community partners to develop a sexual assault prevention grant, project here in Jefferson City. And so that project will focus on looking at threats within the community that can lead to sexual violence, and then developing processes, procedures, resources that can help prevent that sexual violence from occurring. So it's everything from developing opportunities for training and mentorships and things like that, to working with the city.
So you have a lot of federal grants and state grants. Do you have any local donors or businesses that donate?
We do. We rely very, very heavily on our local donors. And we are very, very fortunate that RACS is so supported within this community. We couldn't do what we do just purely with the grants that we receive. Grants are very specific in terms of what you can use that money for and how that money has to be spent. And it doesn't necessarily meet all of the needs that we see and have as families come to us. So the donations that we receive from our individual donors allow us to meet those needs and also allow us to keep, in some cases, keep the lights on in the building. But, it may be that we have families that come to us with nothing but the clothes on their back. And we need items like, pajamas for the kiddos or, clothing for mom. And so those donations provide us those extra resources that we need to make sure that families have what they need while they are with us.
Thank you. So we're going to take another quick pause. Do we have any questions? No worries. We'll just keep on going. So I guess my follow-up question to that would be, grant work seems hard. It's how do you find it?
It's not hard. It's competitive. It can be very competitive. And it's funny, my husband and I were just talking about this last night. When writing a grant, one of the things that are rules, if you will, that I try to follow is to find those grant opportunities that match what it is you're trying to do. For example, I'm not going to write a grant to the American Humane Association for something that deals with children. They are interested in the humanitarian treatment of animals, right? So that's not going to fit. But, the Children's Trust Fund, for example, focuses on child abuse prevention activities. So that may be something that I look at. And when writing a grant and developing a service or a program, you want to really make sure that what it is you're trying to do matches with what it is the funder is wanting to spend their money on. And that's true for federal grant, state grant, a private foundation, what have you. And then really it's just about following the instructions that they give you on how they want that grant laid out. So I spend a lot bring in new revenue for the organization that fits with our mission and our vision. And creating those new partnerships and those new chances.
That sounds amazing. Now, as a nonprofit, you are governed by a volunteer board, correct?
That is correct. We have a 25-member board of directors that oversees the function, the procedures, and the policies of the organization.
And if someone wanted to join the RACS board, if we had room, what would they need to do?
So we have a personnel and nominating committee on our board of directors. Anyone who's interested in being a part of the board are welcome to contact me, and I will put them in contact with that particular committee. There's an application process that potential board members do go through. And then there's also opportunities for just flat out volunteering within the organization. So if somebody kind of wants to dabble in and to kind of see what we're all about and what we do, we invite them to volunteer with us. We have a wide variety of volunteer opportunities, everything from childcare to grocery shopping to helping us sort through the donations that we receive. We have things, landscaping, for example, if somebody is interested in gardening and that kind of thing and wants to help us out with that. We create many different opportunities for people.
That all sounds like amazing work. Now tell me a little bit, if someone was in a crisis mode or they are finding themselves in a DV situation or SA, or maybe they're not even sure, what would be the first step that they could do?
So somebody that finds themselves in a situation and they just want information or somebody to talk to, I always recommend that they call our hotline. Our hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And that number is 1-800-303-0013. And the hotline is constantly answered by a trained professional who is available to answer questions, talk somebody through a dangerous situation, a traumatic response. Now, if an individual finds themselves in actual physical danger, we ask that they call 911 and make sure that law enforcement is there to intervene. But somebody who's looking for services, somebody who's looking for information, perhaps you have a friend or a loved one who may be in a situation and you just want to know, how can I help this person? How can I best support this person? You are also welcome to call the hotline. I do tell people that when you find out about someone's victimization, the best thing you can do to support that friend or family member, first and foremost, is believe them. That helps more than anything else in the world. So many times we see so many survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault where the blame is placed on that survivor. Why did you stay? Why did you let him do this? Why didn't you leave? Why were you there? Those types of questions. And one of my goals is to really flip that narrative. And instead of asking, what did you do? The question needs to be, why did they react in that manner? Instead of saying, why were you there? The question needs to be, what made that perpetrator think that they could commit that act? We have a real issue with victim blaming when it comes to these crimes. When we're talking about sexual assault, when we're talking about domestic violence. And the fact of the matter is that there is nothing that a victim of either of these crimes can do to stop it once a perpetrator has determined that they are going to act in those manners. So we really need to work at better supporting survivors of these crimes. We need to look at taking the blame off of the victim and putting the blame on the perpetrator where it belongs. And we're moving in that direction. Just this week, the state legislature passed a bill that increases the protections for victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking by expanding the opportunity for orders of protection to be granted for longer periods of time. Currently, the longest that a protection order could be granted is for 1 year. This bill allows that to go much longer so that survivors don't have to continue to come back to court to have those orders of protection issued to protect them. It's on the governor's desk now, and it is my hope that the governor signs it quickly and moves into action on that. So we are making small steps forward in progression in those matters.
Now, are women the only ones getting victimized?
Oh, absolutely not. No, and we know that. It's like I said earlier, we know statistically speaking, women are more likely to be victimized than men, but there are male victims of these crimes. And again, regardless of your gender, this should not happen, right? You shouldn't be afraid in your own home. You shouldn't have to be afraid of your intimate partner. And so there are resources out there to help you through those situations. And again, we are not here to tell people what choices they should make, right? We are here to help them navigate through the choices that they make for themselves. We also know that survivors of domestic violence, especially, they will leave an abuser an average of 7 times before they will leave for good. And there are a number of reasons for that. Financial is probably one of the biggest issues. There's a relationship there. There's a past history there. Not every single moment of this relationship was filled with trauma, violence, and fear. Probably more than 80% of that relationship, there was love. There are happy memories. There were good times. But that other 20% included that fear, included that violence, included that trauma. And that's hard to leave when the majority of it could have been good, right? When you leave a domestic violence situation, when you leave an abusive relationship, suddenly you are thrust into a world of independence, economic independence, that survivors may or may not be ready to take on themselves. One of the things that we commonly see with domestic violence survivors is that they were either not allowed to work, or if they did, the finances were handled by the abusive partner. So they didn't have access to their own money. They didn't have access to the bank accounts. They didn't have access to the funds that were available to the family. So when they leave that, they're completely cut off from those economic supports. That's very, very hard to do. And again, we see that through all economic realms of our society. Domestic violence doesn't just happen to the poor. It doesn't just happen to the middle class, and it happens to the wealthy as often as it does to the others. We've had individuals who have contacted us who, they have good jobs, they are working hard, but because they left that 2-income family and they are trying to succeed on their own, it's a financial struggle for them. And I understand why people go back for a number of reasons. Again, sometimes maybe it's, people will say, well, I want my children to have a relationship with their father. Or, the kids miss their home, or I don't want to pull them out of school. There's a realm of reasons for it. It's not our job to judge that. It's our job to support and make sure that if an individual leaves us and does decide to go back, that when they do leave, they have more information and more resources going back than they did when they initially came to us. And so if, God forbid, another incident occur, they're better prepared to deal with that and respond to it and know what path they're going to take should it occur again.
So domestic violence, is it always physical?
No, absolutely not. Domestic violence often does not begin physically. Domestic violence begins with emotional abuse, psychological abuse, manipulation. Again, domestic violence is not about physical violence. Domestic violence is about power and control. And whatever means an abuser can use to maintain power and control over his or her victim is what they will use. So in new relationships, for example, when that power and control struggle begins, you'll see a lot of that emotional abuse, that psychological control, that isolation is what we see a lot of. I equate it to, for example, if my daughter were to come to me and she says, Mom, Dad, I met this amazing guy and he wants to spend all of his time with me and he treats me like a princess and we just can't get enough of each other and he's incredible and I think this is the one. And I know I only have a year of school left, but I'm going to go ahead and drop out because he wants us to move to another state to be closer to his family. And I think I'm going to do that. Most of us are not going to stop and say, oh my gosh, you are in a domestic violence relationship. You need to get out. Right? But what I see in those situations are those beginnings of that isolation, dropping out of school, spending all of your time with this one individual, giving up your other relationships for this relationship, things like that. So the questions I would ask are, well, tell me about the time you spend together. Tell me about the time you spend with other people. What do your friends think of him? How much time do you spend in mixed company? You know, those types of questions. And if the answers to those are, well, my friends don't like him, or, well, I haven't seen my best friend in a couple of months because, you know, those are red flags for me. But most of us don't see that, right? So it begins, like I said, with that isolation phase, with that as a method of controlling that other individual. From there, it gets to more psychological abuse, mental abuse, saying things that make the victim second guess or question themselves. Things like, okay, I'm going to be home for dinner, and when I get home, I want to make sure that we have chicken for dinner. So have it ready when I get home. And dinner is prepared, 6 o'clock comes and goes, 7 o'clock comes and goes, 9:30, 10 o'clock, they come home, dinner is dried out, looks at the table and says, what is this? Well, you told me you wanted to be sure to have chicken for dinner and I had dinner ready at 6. I didn't tell you that. You knew I had to work late tonight. Little things like that make her think, did he tell me that? You know, wow, maybe I misunderstood. And those little occurrences happen over and over and over again. Again, making her second guess herself, making her question her own judgment. And again, I use the pronoun her because of the statistics. And that can progress to the point of where it may become physical. There's an argument or an altercation, and maybe he grabs her by the arm and leaves a mark on her arm, shoves her out of the way and causes her to fall back against a wall, maybe smacks her on the back of the head, telling her that she's stupid and she doesn't listen. No wonder nobody else wants her around. She doesn't have any friends, you know, those types of things. At the same time, though, to the outside world, the perpetrator tends to present themselves as the life of the party, the great guy, everybody's friend, always, you know, the one that they go to, because people who abuse don't want others to know that they are an abuser. So a lot of times what you see is disbelief when it does come out that this violence is happening within the home, because you could have never imagined that